This is a city. This is a modal filter. Automobiles, cyclists, and pedestrians. And this is a rather clumsy attempt at a metaphor. So if you followed the British election this summer, down in the polls and with an electorate ready for change, the ruling Conservative Party tried something. The Prime Minister at the time, Rishi Sunak, proposed something that he called a driver's manifesto. He said it was an initiative to end the alleged war on cars. And part of this was an attempt by Sunak to sort of galvanize what he saw as the growing opposition over the years to something called LTNs, low traffic neighborhoods. Apparently these things were so bad and so hated that Sunak thought it might help him win an election. And today I'm going to take you to explore one of these vortexes of controversy. We're going inside a low traffic neighborhood in London. And one thing I learned, you might have some of these things in your city as well. Luckily, I have a guide for this adventure. This is Jakub Mamczak. He works for the London Cycling Campaign, and the good news is he actually lives inside one of these neighborhoods, and he agreed to take me through Waltham Forest, which is a outer borough of London that's been working towards this kind of thing for more than a decade after winning a grant back in the early 2000s around some kind of Dutch Streets initiative. At first glance, this neighborhood didn't strike me as being that much different than a lot of London residential neighborhoods. Old brick houses, narrow streets. But once you get into it, I really started to notice some subtle differences, like this and like this. Jakub explained that one of the fundamental goals of an LTN is simply to reduce excessive cut-through traffic through a neighborhood, using filters that allow cyclists and pedestrians to go through, but restrict automobiles.
So basically a low traffic neighborhood is an area where essentially there's restrictions or modal filters, because it filters the modes, the travel modes that can go through. So it lets people walk, cycle, wheel, but you can't drive. These filters are kind of put strategically, so you can't drive through the area as a shortcut. So people can still drive, park in front of their homes, they could get deliveries, but it gets rid of that cut-through traffic, which has been increasing in cities all over the world. And really what happens is you have a lot more people walking, a lot more people cycling. The streets are safer, and also just kind of helps build communities, because when you remove the cars or reduce the cars, then people are more willing to kind of just be out, spend more time outside, talk to the neighbors.
There are lots of inexpensive little pieces of infrastructure that are designed to let cyclists and pedestrians pass through, but to redirect traffic away from residential streets onto the busier collector roads where they belong. So what are these? What's the attempt here? This is some kind of filter to keep down car traffic, is that correct?
Exactly. So this one uses its camera enforced. So basically it uses automatic number plate recognition. So anyone who drives through here will get fined. And partially it does allow, for example, emergency services to go through. When some of these schemes, some of the more permanent schemes, they'll have a bollard or some kind of physical closure, and those have been agreed with the emergency services to make sure it doesn't impact time. And the other benefit is here there's always the chance of someone driving through, so you won't necessarily kind of see that reclaim of space. You won't have children playing in the street here versus some other areas you may.
Here's another one called a continuous footway. Basically, the crosswalk or the pedestrian crossing is elevated to the level of the sidewalk. That gets pedestrians up a little higher and creates a speed bump to slow down automobiles.
It's essentially made to slow traffic down. So as people are driving, taking this turn, coming in or out, they're really slowing down and giving way to people who are walking along the high street.
As I was going through this neighborhood, I thought, well, this stuff all looks great, but it's hard to really understand why it matters until I came upon this scene with Jakub. Now, many of you who have kids and live in an auto-centric city know that school drop-off and school pickup is like a crazy time. It might be the most dangerous thing that you and your kids do all day. Motor vehicles coming and dropping kids off and picking them up again at the end of the day. Well, Jakub and I happened to come across a street designated as a school street, which restricts motor vehicle traffic at certain times of the day to try to avoid this chaos. Now, LTNs are not just for residential neighborhoods. This quaint little high street just a few years ago was full of cars. And when a proposal was put forth to restrict it to cyclists and pedestrians, it's safe to say the business owners were not that excited about it.
When it was first opened, protesters come out with a coffin saying it was going to be the death of the high street because they were so worried. There's this thought that everyone needs to drive to the shops and they need to be able to park right outside the shops to do it. And as we can see, it's 8-10 years on, the businesses here are bustling on just a nice day. On the weekends, it's just filled with people. You have all this out there. Even today is a rainy day, but you still have outdoor seating. You still have people kind of under the awnings. And all these businesses are doing great.
Okay, now that we've seen one of these horrible neighborhoods, I'm going to let you in on a secret. These aren't just a British thing. They may go by many different names, but these kind of initiatives to reduce car traffic are happening in cities all over the place. I was just in the city of Victoria, BC, and they use different words to describe it. They call it a AAA network, which means active transportation for all ages and all abilities, but it's basically the same idea. So I'm in the city of Montreal right now, and these kinds of things are kind of everywhere here, from very simple ones to very elaborate ones. Now I'm exploring a bit today on my priority. Those guys sent me one while I was here, thank you very much. But here's a really simple example. These bollards in the middle of this intersection, see, they force cars like this to turn that way. They can't go straight. Same things with cars coming the other way, they have to go that way. But they're built in a way that allows pedestrians and even cyclists to get through them. So sometimes they're called modal filters. This is a really simple one, and I'll show you a couple more examples in Montreal. Some of them can be quite elaborate. This one here in Montreal, there is a street on both sides. It used to come all the way through here, but in order to reduce the cut-through traffic and the speeding motor vehicles, it was blocked off, and what was built instead was this nice little park area that makes good use of this public space that used to be only for car drivers. Here's another example in Montreal that is so common you've probably seen it and don't even think about it, but what we've got here is a nice quiet residential street, but parallel to this, a few blocks that way, is a really busy collector road. And so there's been a lot of cut through traffic on this street, and what's been installed here is a filter. Motor vehicles must turn, they can't go all the way through, and that does reduce that cut down traffic. But at the same time, bikes and pedestrians can keep going straight, and so what's happened is it's made it a little bit easier for bikes and pedestrians, made it just a little bit tougher for vehicles to cut through, and you end up with a nice residential street that's also good for people on bikes and on foot. So why are these things happening in so many neighborhoods? Well, I mean, the simple answer is that nobody wants excessive cut-through traffic on their residential street. I mean, who has ever wanted that? And if this seems controversial to you, and this is often how it's depicted in local media, then you might be surprised to hear that most people who live inside these neighborhoods actually kind of like it. In fact, the London Cycling Campaign did a study 10 years after the start of some of these initiatives, and it's pretty impressive how many people have come to love them. So I don't want to say that everybody loves these sorts of things, but I think sometimes we get kind of wrapped up in the internet debates around these kinds of things, and we lose track of what people are actually thinking and feeling on the ground in the real world. There tends to be a bit of a media cycle to these things. A journalist reaches out to somebody who's opposed because they want to get two viewpoints. That gets amplified through our echo chambers of social media, and soon we have a project that seems to be controversial, but maybe only there's a few people who don't like the idea. In Montreal, I actually got chatting to somebody who lives in a neighborhood with all kinds of modal filters, and he said at first he didn't like it because it made it a little bit more difficult to reach his home by car. He couldn't take every street he wanted, he had to go on a specific route. And he said he still gets annoyed occasionally if he's in a hurry, but the trade-off, he said, is that he doesn't feel unsafe walking on his street anymore. He just sort of goes out and enjoys the quiet, and he knows he's not going to get run down. And he also says it's easier to get out and use his bike, which he really likes. That sounds pretty reasonable, don't you think? I mean, all of these things, of course, have trade-offs, and we have to make these decisions in our cities for ourselves. And another clue may come from that British election that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. That driver's manifesto, well, it sort of came and went with barely a blip, and the government went on to a historic defeat. So much for galvanizing the driver vote, I guess. And the new Labour government's transportation minister just recently announced that they plan to make unprecedented investments in walking and cycling. And as for Jacob, who took me on that tour of that vortex of controversy, he still likes his neighborhood. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.